Good evening. Welcome to another edition of Keene Nosman. I'm Randy Filiault.
And I'm Dave Richards.
And in the studio today, we have a very special guest. And welcome back, Jack Zeller, candidate for Sheriff of Cheshire County.
Thank you, Randy. Nice to be here, Dave.
And it's kind of funny because Jack, back when I was on City Council a few moons ago, Jack was the first Keene police officer that I actually got to go out on patrol with. And I found out that things aren't what you think they are all the time. That Keene, most of us may sleep at night, but a lot of people don't. So, Jack, welcome back from a little bit of retirement. I figured when you retired, I remember the day shaking your hand when you retired. I thought, I wonder how long he's really going to be retired for, because I think, once in law enforcement, always in law enforcement. So, I guess what made you decide to get back into law enforcement after having a couple of years off?
Well, it's been a nice couple of years. We've enjoyed our projects on the farm and got a little bit caught up. And then back in June, several people called me and asked me if I would run. And I asked for a little time to think about it, of course. And
15 to 20 minutes.
To a person, they said, "You don't have time.
Yeah.
We want a commitment." Mm-hmm. And they really wanted me to run, so I threw my hat in the ring. I didn't even know until that evening that Dick Foote was retiring. Mm-hmm. So here we are.
And of course, two other candidates will be running. Eli Rivera, who was a police officer who you were his supervisor for a while.
I was.
And Earl Nelson, who was he was a Keene police officer at one time. So I guess one of the nice things about it is, and there was a good article in the Sentinel a while ago, that even though you've got a couple of local people running, it's basically nobody's attacking the other person. You're just promoting what your platform would be. There's no attacking anybody.
This is true. These two gentlemen are friends. I've supervised them both. I've worked with them both for years. And this is a race for the office, not a race against anybody else or any particular philosophy that I don't agree with. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great, because as we talked about before we went on the air, we were talking about the candidate for sheriff over in Hillsborough County, the one that's going to shoot doctors that perform abortions. Good platform there, buddy. See where that gets you. So it's nice to be back here in Cheshire County where people just talk about the issues. Now, being you were a Keene police officer for how long, Jack?
About 32 and a half years.
Oh, that's it. Just 32 and a half. Yeah?
Around 32.
Yeah, around 32. I mean, what's 32 years among friends? What are some of the things in the sheriff office that you see, that's probably running well? And I suppose one of the things in the sheriff's department also is, of course, you have to deal with budgets now too. As a sheriff, you're kind of a politician too. What are some of the things that you think, with your experience, that you would bring forth to the sheriff's office?
Well, for one thing, I believe that coming into the future, we're going to face ever-shrinking budgets, whether it be by less dollars appropriated or through the loss of, through the inflation, which I think is going to inevitably catch up with us. Every public official has to be aware that they're spending other people's money. Mm-hmm. And that efficiency of operation is of paramount importance. There are retired people and elderly that have a difficult time enough paying their taxes, and to have county taxes continue to go up the way they have in the past 4 or 5 years is a real hardship. So I think the first thing a new sheriff is going to have to do is look at operations, look at mission. And I think that Dick Foote's done a pretty good job. I don't have any arguments with what he's done. He did a great project in his communication center. Mm-hmm. That was of vital importance to the smaller towns that don't dispatch their own police officers, and a vital safety issue, I might add, to that for response time countywide. So that's vital. Protection of the Superior Court, that's extremely vital. You have attorneys and judges in there every day who are dealing with domestic issues, with marriage issues, and these are highly emotionally charged situations, and courtroom security is very important.
Yeah, it certainly is one of those issues. I think if an average person, fortunately maybe hasn't been to court, realize how volatile it can get. Now, it hasn't happened in Keene, but I think every night on the news you'll read where or you'll just see one of those film clips where somebody just went nuts in the courthouse. And I don't think people realize just how quick that can happen, where a situation can get out of hand immediately.
You're perfectly correct, and we have to be on our toes every minute for this stuff.
Dave?
Well, I guess one thing we might want to talk about is what the sheriff's department really does. You know, I mean, they serve warrants, you know, protect the courts, things like that. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit, because the sheriff's role is really different than like the city police role or the state police role.
Well, it is. The high sheriff, of course, is the top law enforcement official in the county, and a sheriff holds his police powers statewide, not just for the county. So there's a vital connection there. I think of it sort of as a triad. The sheriff runs the communications center for the county, police communications center, and that's the bigger part of the budget, actually. They serve civil writ and papers. They transport prisoners to and from the jail. And this is of vital importance to the towns, because otherwise their police officers would be tied up 3/4 of a day just hanging around court and transporting prisoners back and forth. I think the sheriff's department probably ought to step up and include in transporting juveniles. Because if you have a juvenile that needs to go to Concord or to some other facility, to take a smaller town like perhaps Ringe, who may only have an officer or two on duty, to tie them up all day long in Concord is really not a good thing. There's a town without police coverage. These things happen in the middle of the night, and you can leave a town completely wide open. So I think that's one place where the sheriff's department could step up.
Now, as far as, and I know you mentioned, you know, a lot of the small towns, and I know in some states, and I spent a year down in Virginia. It wasn't a good year, but I still spent a year down in Virginia. The county that I was in, virtually the sheriff's department was the police department for the whole county. Like, the individual towns didn't have their own police departments. In this area, like you mentioned, Ringe and some of the smaller towns, do the sheriff's department, do they ever, like, you know, with the cruisers, do they ever just have a cruising sheriff? Like the Keene police might be out on patrol. Is the sheriff's department ever on patrol, or do they only go into a town if they're requested to by that particular police department?
Well, let me back you up a little bit here.
Okay.
There are two towns I'm aware of that have no police department in the county.
Okay.
Westmoreland is one. I'm a selectman there, and we have no police department, so we count heavily on the state police and the sheriff's department.
Okay.
And a second is Gilsum, who contracts with the sheriff's department for patrol at a very reasonable cost. And I think probably this is where one place where towns could really save some money, and the sheriff's department could have some internal county income here by expanding some of this stuff. There's no question about it that the sheriff's department does have a law enforcement arm, and other than the contractual requirements that they have through Gilsum, I suspect their law enforcement is more of on the way to do something else or on the way back to do something else.
At this particular point.
Yeah, there's not too much really active sheriff's patrol.
Well, you know, I found that interesting, like I said, that time that I was down in Virginia. And I thought about some of the small towns here that struggle with one or two police officers and their budgets, because you read some of these small towns that they even talk about going down to like one police officer or whatever. And I've thought, well, with the sheriff's department already in place, I thought that would make sense, where they contract with the sheriff's department because they're already there. And yeah, I think that's a very valid point that towns would want to look at. I mean, if Gilsum's doing it and they're contracting out, obviously, like, you're subcontracting rather than, you know, having your own department.
That's right. And I think it makes eminent sense, especially considering the economic situation that we're all going into.
Well, that does make sense.
Yeah. How many employees does the sheriff's department have?
Well, they have, there's the high sheriff, of course, and then there is a captain, a lieutenant, there are 2 sergeants, and when I say there are 4.9 deputies or 7.3 dispatchers, that's because some are part-time positions. In fact, some full-time positions have been cut and replaced with part-time positions. Some of the deputies are not allowed to work more than 32 hours a week, so they are officially part-time. And not having been sheriff, I'm not aware of all the intricacies of this, but I do know that it had to do with budgeting and that sort of thing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, 32 hours. You're in a pursuit, and it's like, oops,
Sorry, gotta go home now.
gotta stop, gotta go home now. But yeah, I mean, we see that in all lines of government now. You know, cutbacks. But I used to always make the argument when I was on the council when the comment would be about cutting back police, and I know Dave would say the same thing. It'd be, show us we're during a recession where crime goes down, and we'll think about making a cut. But if you can't show us where crime goes down during a recession, then we're not cutting. Find somewhere else to cut.
And in fact, arguably, crime goes up during a recession.
Crime goes up during a recession, and it's just the opposite argument. When people, it's always law enforcement and fire departments during a recession that they want to cut. And it's like, wait a second. During a recession, crimes go up, medical emergencies go up, fires go up. Bad things happen during a recession. Right. And for budget cuts during a recession never made sense to me within law enforcement and fire departments. And I know the Sheriff's Department struggles with the same thing, because the Sheriff's Department is county, but still the city of Keene still pays for the higher proportion of the Sheriff's Department.
Right.
Yes, it does.
You know, I guess, Jack, you know, let's just go back ways and just. I know you were a Keene police officer for 32 years. I guess let's reminisce. Let's go back. What got you into law enforcement to begin with all those many years ago?
Well, my first job in law enforcement was a part-time chief in Nelson. And I stepped up to that one because, as I recall, that was a constable position which was also elected. Mm-hmm. Now we're talking some 35 or so years ago, so I'm not sure, but I believe it was an elected position. In any case, some of the older people in town asked me to step up and take that job. And while I hadn't really considered law enforcement as a career at that point, I believe I was some 23 years old, I really enjoyed it, and I actually enjoyed going out and getting calls from people, and from the most minuscule problem to an actual gunfight that I interceded in.
Things started early, huh?
with no backup, I might add. And I remember at that time the nearest trooper, I was told by Fire Mutual Aid, the nearest trooper was 45 minutes away, so there was no standing around waiting for help. So I found it very intriguing, very interesting, and probably the thing that really had me looking for full-time law enforcement was I had a very valuable car stolen. I lived in Nelson at the time, and the trooper that came up and investigated it called me about 4 hours later. They had located the car in Sullivan in the woods, and I was more intrigued with how they found the car out in the middle of the nowhere than worrying about the loss of the car. And the trooper told me, an informant told me about it. That just intrigued me, because I had always wondered how do the police solve most of the murders? How do they actually find these people that do things? And so I began to do a lot of reading and research, and my present wife, Nancy, I was engaged to at the time, she insisted. One day she saw an opening in Keene. This is in 1977, summer of 77. She insisted that I go down and apply. I did, and I've been grateful ever since to the city of Keene for having allowed me to serve. It's been a wonderful career.
During your time with Keene as starting off, like I said, as a rookie patrolman, and you worked your way up through captain, am I correct?
You
with
are,
Keene before
yeah.
you retired. What were some of the changes that you saw in Keene from then, or has Keene, stayed mainly the same? Did you see any major differences from your beginning to the end while you were with Keene?
Huge differences. The police department in Keene today, in my opinion, is one of the finest anywhere in the country. Clean, ethical, they work hard, they're efficient, and there's great minds in the police department. They build leadership. Training is good. When I came on board, I was amazed that when they took me downstairs, it was an indoor range at that time. My firearms training consisted of 5 minutes. A lieutenant brought a box of rounds down, handed me a revolver, and said, "Let's see if you can hit that target." I hit it 6 out of 6 times. He said, "You're all set. Keep the rest of the box, hit the streets." And that was my firearms training. That shocked me. Even way back then, I was just surprised. And I vowed at that time that if I ever achieved any sort of rank or influence in a department, that would change. It did. Training now is rigorous. It's, I would guess that probably 50% of the people who enter our training program don't make it because the training is, it's very intense, and from the day a police officer is hired to the time they go out on their own is about 6 months. So it's expensive for the city to train an officer for 5.5 months and have to let them go. But the training is something that you cannot substitute. Keene has a very good record as far as civil procedures. You know, we're not getting sued every 10 minutes like LA or even some much smaller towns. And the reason is for training and good leadership.
Actually, I was, who was I talking to? I think I was talking to an attorney. And it was about, they represent, say, DWI cases. And they actually mentioned how methodical Keene is. Because, let's face it, an attorney's looking for any loophole or slip-up that a police officer might do. And a young police officer, let's face it, everything is so procedural now. I mean, that's what an attorney's going to do. He's going to look for a breakdown of procedure. And he mentioned that the training now with the Keene Police Department, very few times do they go to court and get a case dismissed because of a procedural thing with the Keene Police. So that's kind of what you're talking about from you early on, that training needed to maybe ratchet up a little bit.
Ratchet it up, and also I recall a letter that came into the police department. It was addressed to the chief at the time, and it was from an irate citizen. I believe it was unsigned, but the chief put the letter on the board, and it referred to, in no friendly terms, the chief and all his crazy cowboys out on the street. And I remember reading that and thinking, are we cowboys out there? And you know, when I retired and I went before the city council, my last request of the city council was to maintain the training, the integrity and equality of your police department, because we were a cowboy organization at one point, and today we're a professional organization. And I'm so proud of that. The last 10 years of my career were just, it was a wonderful ride. It truly was. And the chief I was captain under was Art Walker, and he did a great job. I'm proud to have worked for him and for the city.
Now, one of the things that you helped develop and professionalize in Keene, and correct me if I'm wrong, was the SWAT team. That you were involved in that. Now, I know some people just say that aren't in the know. It's like, well, why does any community need a SWAT team? And because I think a lot of them they're just seeing the movies, or they're seeing LA, where they come in with 29 armored vehicles. Yeah. I think people don't realize just in this area how active the SWAT team is. And give us a little bit of the history and your knowledge of the SWAT team in the Keene Police Department.
Well, in 1988, Pat McQueen was city manager. And we were in between chiefs, I believe, at that time. But he sent me a letter asking me to organize some sort of a tactical squad. And I believe the original request had come from the police department, but I can't recall that. So I was assigned to do this. I was chief firearms instructor at the time. And we took it on. And we did our research, and we put together, I believe at that time, a 6-officer squad. And I like to break in here just a little bit and say, philosophically, I don't believe in SWAT teams. The only reason we have SWAT teams is because we can't afford to train and equip every officer the way we really should.
Okay.
And so instead of equipping and training 40 police officers to that fine edge, we take some of our more tactically minded officers, put them through some rigorous testing, and if they make the grade, they go through a series of schools, SWAT 1, SWAT 2, and get certifications in some very specialized munitions and very high physical training, that sort of thing. And these are the people we use in critical incidents. And a critical incident can range anything from a lost 4-year-old to a madman in your local box store. And you know, the acronym SWAT, of course, Special Weapons and Tactics, or Special Weapons and Training, however you want to look at that historically. Some people have an emotional reaction to that. And
you think it's the name? It's just the name SWAT that...
I think that it's sort of like, well, I testified relative to the Bearcat. And people were very emotional about that and saying, you know, Keene doesn't need a tank. And they're absolutely right. Keene doesn't need a tank. Keene won't have a tank. That is not a military vehicle. And my position at the hearing, and it is still the same, that if you want and expect your police department to respond to active shooter situations in your city, then give them the tools and the training to do the job. If you don't want to buy a Bearcat, then don't expect them to go to gunfights. This is very simple. What are you asking your police officers to do? And if you look at the mission and the assignments, we go do some very nasty things sometimes. And I prefer to get both victims and my fellow officers in and out in a safe fashion, in as safe a fashion as possible.
Now the Bearcat, obviously, Dave, that was it was controversial at the time.
It certainly was.
And I think it's just because, like you said, some of the different words that were starting to be used, you know, the military, the tank, or then the whole philosophical position about government and where it was coming from and all of that. But you're speaking about the Bearcat. Now, when it finally arrives under low fanfare, you know, as sheriff, obviously that's a piece of equipment that would be incorporated within obviously the whole county. And I mean, I think people don't realize that. But I think it was the one over the shooting over near Portsmouth here earlier in the year, where the police chief got killed. I think if there's never a perfect example of needing a Bearcat to go in, I think that's a perfect example. Would you see the Bearcat be incorporated statewide, like if the sheriff's department responded to an incident with an armed deranged citizen? Would you see requesting Keene's help to bring the Bearcat in for protection?
I
of their officers?
I can. I remember years ago up in the North Country when a gentleman shot a judge and a trooper and a fish and game guy. Our SWAT team was poised to go up and assist. They had us all on standby, and in the end they were able to apprehend him before we were deployed. If we were to deploy in such a situation today, it would definitely be in the Bearcat. And this is a regional vehicle. This isn't it's maintained by Keene and kept in Keene and primarily used by Keene, but only because Keene has the greater chance and personnel to train with this thing. The towns have all been asked to kick in $100 a year or something to maintain maintain it. So to me, it makes eminent sense. I sort of wish the county had decided to buy it rather than just get it on a grant, because people are under the impression that these grants are free, and of course they're not.
Right.
We won't ever pay for the Bearcat. We won't live long enough to do it, and mathematically we can't. But our children are going to. My 31-year-old daughter will have to pay for that Bearcat. So I sort of wish we'd raised the money to do it, and that also, we may not have got it if we had to do that. But that's a choice that the people should be able to make.
And that was one of the arguments with the Bearcat, not so much. I mean, some people were just, let's face it, there's some out there that are just anti-police that are going to just rail against anything the police department does.
Right.
But there were some philosophical arguments about who was funding it and where it was coming from. So there's always different positions to take. But I guess getting back to, as you're running for sheriff now, that's one of the things that you're going to really pay attention to is the cost factor. It's like for every action there's a reaction. For every purchase there's a reaction. But that's one of the things you're going to bring in with your experience is, I guess, cost-effective training. And is that one of the things you want to do? Is obviously bring the standards of training up. I'm not saying the sheriff's department isn't up, but with your experience with the city of Keene, doing some cost-effective training, trying to get them up to the same level. Do you feel the sheriff's department at this point is at the same training level as Keene, or do they need to be brought up also?
In my opinion, they need to be brought up also. In going over the sheriff's department budget, I didn't see a whole lot of money for training included at all. Mm-hmm. Now, it would be unfair of me to say that the sheriff's deputies are undertrained or the bailiffs are undertrained. It is fair for me to assure people that as sheriff, I would take a strong look at training. There is nothing more cost effective. And the Bearcat costs some $250,000. It costs a lot more than that in real dollars when you lose a police officer or a citizen on the street. In real dollars, it's about double that. And some of the expenses that police administrators undertake are to prevent the bigger expense down the road.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to ask, we talk about how rigorous it can be to be a police officer and how you can be out there and how you stay calm when somebody's screaming in your face. Randy and I joke we could never do it. Now, I know there's some kind of psychological testing that goes on to become a police officer. I assume that the sheriffs probably do similar things. I was wondering if you could talk about what it takes to become a police officer or a sheriff, and what kind of psychological either person you're looking for, or what kind of testing that they may go through.
Well, all police officers by statute no police officer can be hired until the agency hiring them has done a background investigation. Mm-hmm. So we would want to know history of an applicant, where they're from, where they've gone to school, their education, their health, of course, and mental health. This is a big part of police work. It's said that if you don't go into police work crazy, you come out 20 years later completely crazy. And while this is funny to listen to, you can burn up in police work. There's no question about it. Mm-hmm. So it's very important that initially you get people that are very, very solid. Mm-hmm. And even at that, we miss the mark sometimes. There is no guarantee. And there's no guarantee how you're going to act at a critical incident until you've been there and done it. No one can guess with any surety. And but we do psychological testing. We do interviews with a psychologist. The lie detector test. We do background for credit checks and that sort of thing, and of course criminal checks. If you have any sort of a criminal background, it's lights out on a law enforcement career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things Dave pointed out, and I've watched it. Let's face it, there's a group of anarchists in Keene who bring out their cameras and do their best to provoke police officers. And Dave and I have talked about it. If somebody's standing in my face just screaming, "You suck," because that's what they do. They get right in the police officer's face and just scream.
Or worse things we can't say on TV.
Yeah, I'm saying that. That's pushing the envelope here on Nosepin. Right. But I've literally seen that when I've been on patrol with the police, that they'll get in their face and just say, "You suck." Now, back in the earlier day, that person would have just been pummeled on the spot and it would have been over. And that's what we're talking about, the difference now with law enforcement. No longer is it the cowboy out there. It's the police officer that can actually almost pull back and just stay calm and look at them and just like, whatever.
It drives them crazy. But the other side of that is interesting to me. When I first came on in the mid-'70s, to drive through the college on Winchester Street was to hear screaming epithets, pig, They'd throw stones, snowballs at us. They really didn't like us at all. And here we are 30 years later, and you park in a college parking lot, and a dozen kids will come up and ask you, what does it take to be a police officer? And it's so interesting that over the 30 years I was in Keene, to see basically little public support for anything we did. And of course, with no public support, a typical police officer figured the public didn't care what they did. To have that turned around with support, and I credit the Keene Sentinel with a lot of this, because we had a downtown riot at one point in the 80s, and the Sentinel came out with a very strong support for the police department, for more personnel, more training, more equipment, and that was sort of the turning point. And through scheduling changes, we doubled the number of police officers on the street at night, and it just made a whole world of difference. Randy, when I came on in 1977, if you were 40 years of age or older, you didn't dare walk around the square after 9 o'clock at night. There would be 75 people in front of the church on the square, all drinking beer, all drunk, rowdy, and there were no laws that covered it. Today, if you can't walk down your street safe at 2 o'clock in the morning in Keene, you better complain to the police department. And it's a beautiful city today. It's just a wonderful place to live and work. And the bigger reason to me as a law enforcement official is that the city ponied up and they demanded that their police department become professional, become sharp, become well-trained, well-equipped, and you see the results here today.
That's a good lead-in for my next subject, Dave. Dave and I talk each week about, well, I do a printout, and I've actually got it right here. This is the weekly log for the Keene Police. Every week, I go through all the calls. They average over, between calls and walk-ins and reports, over 100 a day. As you're well aware, there's no rest for the weary. So this is this week's report. We usually break it down pretty in depth. See that, huh? We're spending extra money on sound effects here. Keene State came back this week. And, I know in the past when it's come back, it's been kind of chaos, I guess. One of the things we noticed this week when they came back is, well, let me give you a breakdown here. And this is for the week when college just came back. Alcohol arrests citywide for the week. There were 30 alcohol-related arrests. Those were either intoxicated persons or people with an open container. There's 30 arrests. 25 of them were for college students. Drug arrests, in just about all these for smoking pot. There was 10 drug arrests in Keene, and 9 were Keene State students, smoking pot. But basically, this is really relatively quiet when you think 5,000 students just came back into Keene. One thing that I did notice is, of course, they had the arrests, and most of it were for the college kids. They're in town, they're feeling their oats, and most of them were walking down within the fraternity areas, had an open container in their hand, and they didn't realize that young-looking guy with a ball cap on sideways was a plainclothes Keene police officer. As far as that goes, and you just alluded a little bit where when you first started, there was that feeling that the students didn't like the Keene police, and did you see as you were going on with the Keene Police Department? Now I know we have the college liaison officer. Was that one of the things that you helped bring forth? Was like, okay, what do we do with? It used to be Keene and Keene State, and not only with police department students, with citizens of Keene and college students. There was this, you've got your college, now build a damn wall around it and leave us alone till you go home. What was your perception of what brought things along better between Keene and Keene State?
Well, I think that things did get a little out of hand for a few years, and I think that community leaders and law enforcement and college administrators just came to an agreement that if we all work together, we could more quickly educate kids coming into the city and educate them as to how some of their actions affect citizens that aren't part of the college community. And you're absolutely spot on with the 5,000 plus kids that come back, and there are some weekends we have 125 arrests of college kids. But I did get a little tired at times of people whining about the college because for all the exuberance shown by students, and I was a student once and I had exuberance, the city so benefits from the college in so many ways. You could write a book on the effects of the college. And I had an interesting conversation with a merchant, a downtown merchant at one point that had some graffiti or something on a store, and this merchant told me that he wished the college would just go away. And I was taken aback by that because I would bet that 50% of his annual income is derived from college students because of the type of merchant he is. So I was amazed at that. And we do have some police issues with the college, but on the greater hand, I found the college kids interesting, bright, they contribute, and the college itself as an institution, it'd be a terrible loss if we didn't have it. And frankly, the city of Keene wouldn't be the city it is without Keene State. So while there are some hard times on weekends, and especially early in the fall before some of these kids get educated as to the system, it takes a little overtime and a little expense, but that expense comes back to the city in 100 different ways, in my opinion.
Well, it's an economic engine, among other things. I mean, without the college, that's just millions and millions of dollars that gets pumped into the community. So
that's exactly.
You have to take the good with the bad, and is it really that bad?
Well, bad news usually creates more news anyhow than good news.
Right.
I mean, if a college student was arrested over the weekend for a drug or alcohol related, it's front page. But do you ever see an article on the front page saying Keene State students spent $100,000 downtown this weekend?
Right.
Overall.
Right.
No.
Well,
you're not going to hear that, because it doesn't really generate front page news.
No, you look at the Pumpkin Fest, which gets a lot of attention.
That's going to be my next question.
Last Pumpkin Fest, once when it was over, there was dozens of college kids that helped clean up downtown, and I don't know how well that was reported. So, it's not like they're all doing bad things. I mean, they helped clean up all the pumpkins and sweep and pick up all the paper and everything, and so it's. You're right. You get the headlines on the bad things, but there's a million other things that happen that you don't know.
Well, for every college kid we arrest, sometime during the year, we arrest a citizen of the county for some infraction or another. And this is the way it is. The greatest majority of people are law-abiding folks, just want to go to work and raise their children and live in a wonderful city. And the majority of folks do.
Yep.
So.
But the ones that don't, that's why you have a police department.
Exactly.
Job security. Pumpkin Festival. Now, we know the Sheriff's Department's involved in the Pumpkin Festival because when Dave and I were out filming it last year, we saw they used the sheriff's van.
Yeah, the van of shame.
The van of shame, rounding them up as the kids had their faces on the windows going, oh no, this is going to be a bad night. Obviously, you have been involved with the Pumpkin Fest for the earlier years, and some of the drama that goes on. And I know the Sheriff's Department and all the local police departments work together for this, one-day event that's pretty chaotic, but once again generates a lot of revenue. What were some of the issues that you saw with Pumpkin Festival, and as it went on, and some of the changes that you saw within the law enforcement part of it, maybe enforcement?
Well, I don't remember it ever being too big a deal for law enforcement until 9/11.
Really?
That year, I was a detective sergeant. Then I was put in charge of security for the entire festival. And right after the World Trade Center went down, and that was a terrifying experience because we had no idea what we were in for. Nationally, we had no idea. And so we had very, very heavy security. We had undercover security, we had on-the-roof security, we had under-the-car security, we had canine security, we had outside security, inside security, we had security riding on all the buses, and that sort of thing. And then as the national panic sort of subsided, we got a better grasp on, a better handle of what we needed to do. And tactically, I'm not going to express what we do for security at Pumpkin Fest, but to me, as an administrator, all these things to police officers can appear to be a pain in the neck. On the other hand, if these incidents didn't happen, you wouldn't need a police department. And so planning, efficiency, again, and just getting the job done rather than complaining about what a big job it is. Let's get her done. And I'm a firm believer in that. In a city like Keene, you should have pumpkin fests, and you should have art walks, and you should have all the attendant things that make it the place we love. And it costs some money. Police departments cost you money. There's no question about that, and they're not cheap. But as a sheriff goes, and the van down there, the sheriff's department cooperates with every town and the state police in every large endeavor, whether it's VIP protection for presidential candidates, or a big incident like Pumpkin Fest, or Keene State College opening. We work together, and we all work together when the baseball issues arose, and the Red Sox were winning, or when they were losing, either side.
Losing more than winning, but we won't go there.
That's another issue.
But we're back to losing again.
But the sheriff's department will work with any other department.
Yep.
And does.
Speaking about, we mentioned, the security for Pumpkin Fest. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Jaffrey Fireworks, which is their Pumpkin Fest. Obviously, one deranged or just upset caller decided, I can really mess things up here. And they canceled it. And, I was wondering from the outside looking in, was it an overreaction? Where was their decision on that? But they were saying, unlike the Pumpkin Fest, which has a footprint, and of course we had years of, as you just said, modifying security, the Jaffrey Fireworks, they realized at the time they really didn't have a plan. And from the outside looking in at the Jaffrey Fireworks thing, do you think that they now are going to have to implement a plan similar to like Pumpkin Fest? If you were the police officer kind of in charge over there, what are some of the differences? I mean, how do you prevent one person from being able to do this? You know what I'm saying?
Well, first of all, you can't 100% protect everybody at once. It's literally impossible. And I know that the public understands this. A deranged individual can do what they plan to do. This was a slightly different case where someone called this in, made the threat. So that puts it in a little bit different light. I wouldn't second guess their decision to call off the event. We get occasionally calls for bombs in schools and this, that. And you can't just cross all these off as being called in by some crank who doesn't appreciate the noise of firecrackers. Sometimes you just have to take these things seriously.
Right.
And it's expensive, it's disappointing. We're sorry that there are people out there that do such things, but I'm not sure you can prevent it.
On something like this, with the Jaffrey one, obviously the police departments looked at it, and they must have seen something in there that made them realize this might not just be your crank call, like you mentioned. The kid wants to get out of school who calls in a bomb threat to the high school. Do you think there was something viable in this, just enough where they said, you know what, the risk isn't worth it, that this person said something that might have just raised a flag more than just your bonehead caller?
Well, as I said, I'm not part of the investigation, and I probably won't be. But I suggest that the law enforcement administrators over there probably made the right call. Now, a bomb didn't go off. On the other hand, if they'd gone on with the fireworks and a bomb had gone off, we'd be talking about this for the next 10 years. this one, we'll be talking about it again a year from now. What are we going to do if somebody does it again? And it'll be up to the folks in charge over there to put together a plan. And it also, when you have huge crowds like that, it's getting them in and out of a particular footprint. But that footprint's pretty much towns wide.
Right.
You know, people park on hills, they park everywhere, trying to see them, even if they're not right at the event itself. So it's a very difficult thing to have a handle on.
So when calls like this come in, you know, not only just say, you know, local police or sheriff's departments or state police, when you get a call like this, or just say a bomb threat to a high school, is there different scenarios that you look at? You know, for example, I mean, let's face it, a kid could call into the high school every day for the rest of the year and just say, yeah, there's a bomb in the bathroom, and hang up. Is there certain things that the departments look for that might make the threat more viable? Is it, you know, can it be a real crapshoot?
It can be a crapshoot. However, there are things that we look for, and I would not disclose them here.
Okay.
But one thing we do is confer heavily with school leadership, principals and assistant principals, and guidance counselors and that sort of thing. And we have an officer at the high school. And I believe that one day we'll have one at the middle school. That's a big plant. That's a big plant. And I don't know what present plans are, but we're pretty well in touch with the schools. It's important that we maintain constant liaison with the principals and leadership, and we do. I say we, the Keene Police Department does, as they should.
Well, obviously, in a couple of months, you could be back in the position where it is we again.
That's true. Yeah, we're hoping so.
You know, just off the cuff a little bit here. So after you get done with you know, being a police officer, somebody coerced you into running for selectman, huh?
They did.
No rest for the weary.
They did, and it was an interesting experience. The guy I ran against is a perfect gentleman, and I happened to squeak by and get it. It's been a great experience, and again, it is interesting because you find yourself in a position of spending other people's money, and this matters to people. And
Believe it or not,
it matters big time, and so it even reinforces my instinctual feelings about ask people's permission, be ladies and gentlemen, work together, and come together for what common goals are, and go to it from there. Decide how we want to do it, and how to approach it, and how to pay for it. Well,
Dave and I can both vouch for that. People really do give a damn how the money's spent.
Well,
I think sometimes career politicians in Washington forget that people understand that tax dollars have to be spent, but it's like, you know, can you spend them wisely, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've, you know, since I've been on council, I mean, we've really done a good job. And, you know, you say be gentlemen, we really have. I mean, there's few incidences of tempers flaring on council, and I as a counselor, I enjoy doing it. You know, there's always differences of opinions, but for the most part, nobody takes them home with them. You know, you hash out the debate, you make the vote, you win, you lose, and you know, you respect the other people. And I think the council does a very good job of that.
You know, and Jack, you know, I know you're running for sheriff now, but I actually think one of the best things that you did do was run for selectman. And got it, because I know, you know, I've been on the council, I haven't been in law enforcement, and I know a lot of times when you're on council and you're voting on the budgets and you're going back and forth, and you know, you're being a police officer, I know sometimes the police officers look in, or fire department, or public works, or whatever, and they look at the council and go, you know, what were you thinking? You know, why'd you do that? But now that you get out of law enforcement for a while and went on to the elected part of it, it's great experience to all of a sudden now you're on the other side of it, and you're like, whoa,
it is.
This is different.
And you know, I went to quite a few city council meetings, and I was always actually quite impressed with the decorum, and my last experience here with the hearings on the Bearcat, I was most impressed with the way the hearing was run, the dignity afforded everyone, the discipline, And I was absolutely amazed at how well run those hearings were. I was very impressed. Win or lose on a Bearcat issue,
Right.
just the way it was run and the respect shown.
Agreeing to disagree.
Yeah,
Agree to disagree.
exactly.
You know, we had we had a meeting with pro and anti-nuclear people, and that was really a challenge. But when you that's highly charged emotionally.
Right.
And I was chair of the meeting, and I really focus on everybody gets a chance to speak, everybody gets their point of view, and nobody say anything bad about anybody else. Tell us what your opinion is, and for us to make our determination. But I was impressed at how well the public reacted to that. Only one right at the end of the meeting, one gentleman said something unpleasant about other people, but the room was packed. 40 people spoke, and everybody was respectful. You will find, on council, if you are, if you're going to insult people, you're going to scream and yell, you're going to diminish yourself immediately.
Yeah.
And people will look and say, you know what, your opinion is becoming less and less valuable because you're just
Absolutely.
because you're acting crazy. You will get much further acting respectfully than you will acting disrespectfully. I can promise you that.
We got about 5 minutes left in the show, and before we wrap up, I do have to put in my little what happened last week at the Keene Fire Department. There was Keene Fire had 89 calls last week. They had 3 fires, 2 kitchen fires. Once again, they put them down before you had a chance to burn down your house. One outside grill fire, too close to the. Don't put your grills on the porch, on the deck.
Right.
Don't put them near the wall. You're going to burn your house down. 69 EMS calls for the ambulance. 12 of them are motor vehicle accidents. And I'm sure one of them was that tragedy up on Route 12 with the motorcycles you got run into, which is horrible. 5 service calls, 6 good intent calls, 7 false alarms. Once again, no malicious calls.
Nice.
And Dave and I talk about this, Jack, going back in your days as a police officer. One of the things that has virtually gone to zero is malicious calls or fire alarm pulls at Keene State College. Those used to be huge. They're at like 0 now.
And one of the reasons is because it used to be a lot of fun and no cost. Now the students pay when that happens. And as I've said on my website, none of us ever learned to turn out the lights until we were actually paying the bill. And now that students have to pay for the cost of those false alarms, we have many, many fewer.
Amazing how they hit in the wall. It changes perspective of that.
It does.
You'd mentioned the website. Oh, there it is. Look at that. Okay. We've got it. Technology is just amazing, isn't it?
It is. We're on the cutting edge.
Absolutely. And we do want to point out to people, and make sure you tell your friends, because not everybody's around to watch the show during the day when it comes on, or at 3 in the morning when it repeats. Although I did talk to a lady at saw us the other day at 3 in the morning. Good to know people are up late at night. We are on YouTube now, and usually it's uploaded within 24 hours after we do the show. So if you want to watch a repeat of this show or any of the other shows that we've done, go to YouTube and just put in Keene No Spin, like it says on the screen. And you can watch us anywhere, because we're in Keene, Marlborough, Swansea, but there are some towns around that people I know want to watch the show. So go to YouTube and tell your friends, go to YouTube.
I just think that's funny about nobody learns to turn the power off, because nowadays I just say to my son, who don't I work for? And he looks at me, you don't work for the electric company. That's right, son.
Yep.
Turn the lights off.
Isn't it funny how you hear yourself saying things? It's generation to generation.
Yep.
You hear yourself saying the things. Shut the light off, turn the refrigerator off, money doesn't grow on trees. And as a kid, you're like, oh yeah.
Yep.
And now you start saying, I'm like, oh, did I just really say that?
I am old now.
Yeah, I'm officially entered old. Okay, we got a couple minutes left to go. I guess, I don't know if we missed anything, Jack, that you wanted to say to the viewers or anything in the next 2 minutes. We've covered a lot, and Dave and I, we kind of do this. We kind of take over.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you wanted to put out there that we might not have covered?
I can't think of a whole lot. I think that people require a sheriff who's able to provide the legislative mandated services and services that the citizens of the county want. Efficiency is going to become increasingly important. I think there are things we can do to tighten those hatches. Mm-hmm. I think that there are additional things we can do. I think a little more night work might be on hand. A little bit more interaction with the DTF, the Drug Task Force, and a little more transportation of juveniles for at least the smaller towns, and even Keene. I can recall when, even when Keene with 8 detectives would have trouble sometimes bringing someone up to transport a juvenile, and this is pretty much a 4 to 6 hour job, and so there are times when the Sheriff's Department can really step up to the plate and serve all the citizens of the county.
Excellent.
Sounds good.
Dave, we've got about 45 seconds left. Any plugs you want to put in? Obviously, we didn't cover City Council this week, but
It really,
they're just all boring stuff right now. Anyhow, it'll get heated up here pretty quick.
well, there's definitely some big stuff coming up. I mean, this, PLD was mostly request to use city property. It wasn't anything truly dramatic. As I said, I believe it's either the 13th or 15th of September. The surface water protection, which doesn't sound exciting, but you know what? It is important. We're kind of struggling with that. That'll come back to the joint planning meeting. Lots of questions to be answered. So I will update when after the next meeting.
Yep. So if you have any complaints, by the way, what's going on in the city, just call Dave. And if you want to have any, compliments what's going on, just call me. Dave handles complaints. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week. Thank you to Jack Zeller
Thank
for
you, Jack.
sheriff. Have a
Thank you
good
for having
weekend.
me.
Good night.
Good night now.